so just as I say we aren't going to let any dogs or water hoses turn us around, we aren't going to let any injunction turn us around. Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. But it really doesn't matter with me now, because I've been to the mountaintop. I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord.
Martin Luther King Jr., John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, Charlie Kirk. For men, for powerful voices, for assassinations. But why does history keep repeating itself? Is it hatred? Is it ideology? Or are the authorities missing something critical when it comes to protecting outspoken figures? And let's ask the hardest question of all. Do people deserve to die because of their beliefs, their ideology, their ideas about how society should work? If a voice is silenced simply because it sees the world differently, aren't we erasing the very beauty of humanity itself? I want to hear from you. Drop your opinions, your theories, even your conspiracies in the comments. Are investigators overlooking red flags? Are there security lapses no one is talking about? And more importantly, can we prevent this cycle from happening again? Or is history doomed to repeat itself?
Not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
Scott Messon, who's one of the most accomplished bond salesmen and individuals in the hedge fund space ever, right? That's not unqualified. Pete Hegseth, who's actually a frontline warfighter, unlike Lloyd Austin, who never fought a war in his life, right? We have Kristi Noem, who was an accomplished congresswoman and governor from a major state running Department of Homeland Security. You have Howard Lutnick, who's a very famous and well-known financial mind and titan from Wall Street running Cantor Fitzgerald. Marco Rubio, who was a very well-respected U.S. Senator on Foreign Affairs, who's now doing a great job as Secretary of State. So build out your argument why you think this cabinet is unqualified. Seems to me very, very qualified, actually, across the board.
Okay, so the first thing I'm going to start with, I mean, this is the most obvious one, and I have many other examples that I'd like to get into, but Pete Hegseth, you mentioned, I think that is kind of, I don't really understand why you would mention somebody that leaked war chats to a liberal journalist. To me, that doesn't seem like the kind of person that I would want to be.
Well, hold on, time out. He did not leak it. First of all,
he added the person.
The person who actually is responsible was just removed as national security advisor today.
Oh, you mean the person who was the fall guy for Pete Hegseth's problem?
No, he added somebody without his knowledge, but fine.
Okay, so why wouldn't he see him? Why wouldn't he see the person who's in the chat before talking about war policy?
So, time out. Just so we're clear, I'm sure you've been added to group chats with 30 or 40 people sometimes, and you enter in with trust that every acronym is actually a government official. Obviously, that will not happen again. Just so we're clear, Signal was an approved chat by the Biden administration. It's an approved secure channel by
I'm not talking shit on Signal.
However, time out. Let me ask a question about Pete Hegseth. Would you rather have a warfighter or a bureaucrat run the United States military?
I would rather have somebody that doesn't have a history of alcoholism. I'd rather have somebody that... I mean, realistically...
Wow. So do you think how about Mark Milley and Lloyd Austin, were they better at running the U.S. military than Pete Hegseth?
I mean, I think you're going to probably start talking about how there's higher enlistment numbers under
not only
Pete
that.
Hegseth.
So recruitment in the military is up majorly. Thank you, Pete Hegseth. He's doing a pretty good job. Number two, procurement. We're saving money. Estimates are that we'll save hundreds of billions of dollars in efficiency.
Different leaders, same fate. What you're about to hear isn't just history. It's a search for the patterns, the security lapses, and the conspiracy theories. Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. was more than a preacher. He became the face of a movement, a voice that demanded equality and justice for millions who had been silenced for centuries. Born in 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia, King rose to national prominence in 1955 during the Montgomery bus boycott, sparked by Rosa Parks. His message was clear: nonviolent resistance, peaceful protest, change through love, not hate. By 1963, he stood on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial and gave one of the most iconic speeches in American history, "I Have a Dream." He envisioned a world where children of all races could stand together as equals. But by 1968, his mission had expanded. King was speaking not only against segregation, but also against poverty and the Vietnam War. His growing influence earned admiration worldwide, but also hostility at home. The final days. On April 3, 1968, King arrived in Memphis, Tennessee. He was there to support striking sanitation workers who demanded fair pay and safer working conditions. That evening, he delivered a speech at the Mason Temple Church. It would be his last. In that speech, he spoke words that now feel prophetic: "I may not get there with you, but we, as a people, will get to the promised land." The next day, April 4th at 6:01 p.m., King stepped out onto the balcony of room 306 at the Lorraine Motel. A single rifle shot struck him in the jaw and neck, severing his spinal cord. He collapsed as his friends rushed to his side. He was taken to St. Joseph's Hospital, where he was pronounced dead at 7:05 p.m. He was just 39 years old. The investigation and arrest. Law enforcement quickly traced the shot to a boarding house across from the motel. There, investigators found a rifle with fingerprints on it, binoculars, and other evidence. The rifle was linked to James Earl Ray, a 40-year-old escaped convict with a history of robbery. A massive manhunt followed. On June 8, 1968, 2 months after the assassination, Ray was arrested at London's Heathrow Airport while attempting to leave the country on a false passport. In March 1969, Ray entered a guilty plea to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to 99 years in prison. But days later, he tried to withdraw the plea, claiming he had been manipulated into confessing. The questions that remain. Officially, James Earl Ray is recorded as the assassin, but doubts have never fully disappeared. Ray maintained until his death in 1998 that he was not the shooter, insisting he was set up. Over the years, multiple investigations reviewed the case. While no new trial was ever granted, his claims fueled decades of speculation. King's family, too, expressed doubts about the official version. In 1999, a Memphis civil court heard testimony from witnesses who suggested a broader plot. The jury concluded that there had been a conspiracy to kill Martin Luther King Jr., though this was a civil verdict, not a criminal conviction. Other questions linger. Why did an escaped convict with little money manage to travel across continents before being caught? Did he truly act alone? Or were others involved who were never brought to justice? Legacy of a crime. What cannot be denied is the impact of that single gunshot. King's assassination triggered grief and outrage across the country. In more than 100 cities, riots broke out. For many, his death symbolized not just the loss of a man, but the loss of hope for peaceful change. To this day, the Lorraine Motel has been preserved as the National Civil Rights Museum. Visitors stand where King stood, looking across at the boarding house where the fatal shot was fired. And people still ask, was it a lone gunman? Or was there more behind the murder of one of history's most powerful voices? Martin Luther King Jr. fought with words, not weapons. His belief in nonviolence reshaped America. But in the end, violence took his life. The official record names James Earl Ray as the killer. Yet the doubts, the unanswered questions, and the conspiracy theories keep his assassination in the realm of mystery even decades later. And tragically, King was not the only one. Just years before, another leader was cut down in broad daylight, President John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy. From one voice of change to another, the story shifts to John Fitzgerald Kennedy. He wasn't just a president. To many, he represented the hope of a new America. Young, charismatic, and bold, Kennedy carried a vision that promised progress. But like Martin Luther King Jr., his life was cut short by violence. And just as with King, the questions surrounding his death have never truly gone away. Political vision and influence. John F. Kennedy was elected as the 35th President of the United States in 1960 at just 43 years old, the youngest person ever elected and the first Catholic president. His rise marked a generational shift. Kennedy carried the banner of the new frontier, promising economic growth, social reform, and global leadership during the tense years of the Cold War. His presidency was filled with defining moments. The Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961 was a humiliation, but in 1962, Kennedy stood firm during the Cuban Missile Crisis, steering the nation away from nuclear war. That 13-day standoff showed his ability to balance strength with restraint. At home, Kennedy eventually moved decisively on civil rights. By 1963, after Birmingham and the March on Washington, he called for sweeping legislation to end segregation. And then there was the space race. In 1961, Kennedy challenged America to land a man on the moon before the decade was out. That vision would be fulfilled in 1969, years after his death. Kennedy was more than a politician. His speeches, his presence, and his youth inspired millions, making him a symbol of progress and possibility. Assassination and aftermath. But on November 22, 1963, that promise was shattered. Kennedy traveled to Dallas, Texas, riding in an open-top limousine with First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy and Texas Governor John Connally. Crowds lined the streets, cheering as the motorcade rolled through Dealey Plaza. At 12:30 p.m., gunshots rang out. Kennedy was struck in the neck and head. Connally was also wounded. The limousine raced to Parkland Memorial Hospital, but at 1 p.m., the President of the United States was pronounced dead. He was just 46 years old. The nation was stunned. Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in aboard Air Force One just hours later, as Jackie Kennedy, still in her blood-stained suit, stood beside him. Within hours, Lee Harvey Oswald was arrested. A former Marine who had once defected to the Soviet Union, Oswald was accused of firing 3 shots from the Texas School Book Depository. But 2 days later, before he could stand trial, Oswald was shot dead on live television by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. Millions watched in disbelief. The man accused of killing a president had himself been silenced. The Warren Commission concluded in 1964 that Oswald acted alone. But the sudden death of the accused assassin only deepened public suspicion. Conspiracy theories. From that day forward, doubts have haunted Kennedy's assassination. Some believed there was more than one shooter. Witnesses reported hearing shots from the grassy knoll, not just from the book depository. Others pointed to Kennedy's conflicts with powerful groups. Some suspected organized crime, angered by Robert Kennedy's crackdown on the mafia. Others speculated about Cold War enemies, Cuba or the Soviet Union, seeking revenge. And still others believed Kennedy's policies, including his cautious stance on Vietnam, threatened the military-industrial complex, interests that benefited from war. In 1979, a new investigation by the House Select Committee on Assassinations concluded Kennedy was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy. Yet they could not identify who else may have been involved. Even today, thousands of government files remain classified or heavily redacted. Decades later, polls show that most Americans still doubt the official version of events. Reflection. Kennedy's death was more than the end of a presidency. It was the loss of a symbol, a vision of youth, progress, and possibility. But just like the death of Martin Luther King Jr., his assassination left behind haunting questions. Did one man truly act alone? Or was there more to the story, something still hidden? History may never fully answer those questions. But the echoes of that day in Dallas continue to shape the way Americans see their leaders, their institutions, and the dangers faced by those who dare to speak with vision. Malcolm X. From John F. Kennedy, we now move to another figure whose voice shaped America's turbulent 1960s, Malcolm X. If Martin Luther King Jr. preached nonviolence and integration,
sure
Malcolm
you've been
X
added to
represented
chats
something
with 30 or
different:
40 people
defiance,
sometimes, and you enter in with
self-determination,
trust that every
and a
acronym
call
is
for
actually
Black
government
Americans
official.
to claim their
Obviously, that will
dignity
not
by
happen
any
again. Just so
means
we're clear,
necessary.
Signal was an approved
His
chat by the
life,
Biden
his
administration.
ideology,
It's an approved
and his
secure channel
assassination
by,
tell a
I'm
story
talking
not
about
only
Signal.
of one
Let me
man,
ask a
but of a
question about Pete
nation
Hegseth.
deeply
Would you rather
divided
have a
on race,
warfighter or a
power,
bureaucrat
and
run the
justice.
United States military?
His
I would
ideology
rather have
versus
somebody that doesn't have a
MLK's.
history of
Malcolm
alcoholism.
X
I'd
was
rather have
born
somebody
Malcolm
that-
Little in
I mean,
1925.
realistically-
So do you
His
think
early
Lloyd, how
life
about
was
Mark
scarred
Milley
by
and Lloyd
poverty,
Austin? Were
the
they
death of
better
his
at
father
running the
under
US
suspicious
military than Pete
circumstances,
Hegseth?
I mean,
and
I
the
think you're gonna probably
institutional
start talking
racism
about
of
how there's higher
America.
enlistment numbers.
After
not
serving
only that,
prison time in
so
his youth,
recruitment in the
he
military
joined the
is up
Nation of
majorly. Thank you,
Islam,
Pete Hegseth.
a
He's doing a
movement
pretty
that
good job.
combined Islam
Number
with
two,
black nationalism.
procurement.
By
We're
the
saving money.
1950s
Estimates
and
are that we'll
early
save hundreds of billions of
1960s,
dollars in
Malcolm
efficiency.
X
War
had
games
risen
are
to
up.
national prominence as one
amount
of the
war games we're
movement's
doing in the
most
Southeast
powerful
Pacific has increased by
ministers.
30%.
He preached
This is
that
a
black
military
people
town
should
here in San
reject the
Diego.
systems that
They
oppress
have a
them,
massive
protect
increase
themselves,
in
and
people
build
wanting to
their
join
own
the
institutions
Navy,
separate
wanting to join
from
the
white
military.
society.
That wasn't happening
This
under
stood in
Biden.
sharp contrast to
Morale is
Martin
actually
Luther King
30
Jr.
points
while
higher
King
now now that
advocated
Pete
for
Hegseth, a
nonviolence,
warfighter's
integration,
warfighter, is
and
running the
working
US
within
military.
We
America's
have a
system.
complete difference.
Malcolm
No,
X
we'll never get an
openly
agreement.
rejected
not agree, but
nonviolence,
show me,
at
then
least
prove
in
the
his
evidence.
early
What is
years.
one number
He
that is
famously
worse
declared that black
for the US
Americans should
military now that
achieve
Pete
freedom
Hegseth's in
by
control?
any
The
means
numbers that you're
necessary.
talking about are
But
numbers
Malcolm X's thinking evolved.
actively do not
After
care about
breaking with the
because I
Nation
think
of
that we have
Islam
an
in
overly powerful military, and I
1964,
think
he
too much of
traveled
our
to
money goes to
Africa
military.
and the
but,
Middle
like,
East.
tell me one thing
In
he's
Mecca,
done,
he
like,
experienced a broader
numerically,
form
like,
of Islam,
empirically, judge
one that
his
united
performance,
people across race
right?
and
What is
nationality.
one thing that you
He
could say,
returned
wow,
with a new
the Pentagon
vision,
is in a
one
worse
that
place
still
because of
demanded
Pete
black
Hegseth?
dignity,
I would say
but
his
also
inconsistent-
Sattler and Thomas 15X Johnson were arrested and convicted for the assassination. But controversy surrounded the case from the very beginning. Conspiracies and controversies. Many believed the truth of Malcolm X's death was far more complicated than three gunmen acting alone. The Nation of Islam feud, Malcolm's break from the Nation of Islam was bitter. He had accused its leader, Elijah Muhammad, of hypocrisy and corruption. The nation, in turn, viewed Malcolm as a traitor. Many believed his assassination was ordered or encouraged by nation leadership, law enforcement surveillance. Declassified documents later revealed that both the FBI and the NYPD had heavily monitored Malcolm X in the years leading up to his death. Under the FBI's COINTELPRO program, Malcolm, like Martin Luther King Jr., was considered a radical threat. Some researchers argue that this surveillance may have contributed to an atmosphere where his assassination was allowed to happen, or at the very least, not prevented wrongful convictions. In 2021, after a decades-long review, two of the men convicted of Malcolm X's murder, Norman 3X Butler, later Muhammad Aziz, and Thomas 15X Johnson, later Khalil Islam, were exonerated. Investigators found that evidence had been withheld and that the FBI and NYPD failed to disclose critical information during the trial. Both men spent decades in prison for a crime they did not commit. This raised a disturbing question. If two of the men convicted were innocent, then who actually killed Malcolm X? And why was the full truth hidden for so long? The third man, Talmadge Hayer, admitted his role in the assassination but maintained that Aziz and Islam were not involved. For years, his confession fueled doubts about the trial's legitimacy. The official record today acknowledges wrongful convictions, but the full story of who planned Malcolm X's murder, and whether there was broader involvement, remains unsettled. Reflection. Malcolm X's assassination silenced one of the most uncompromising voices of his era. His ideas, whether you agreed with them or not, forced America to confront its racial wounds in a way that could not be ignored. But just like the deaths of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., Malcolm's killing left behind a legacy of unanswered questions. Was it simply the result of internal feuds within the Nation of Islam? Or did government agencies, already watching him closely, play a role in shaping the events that led to his death? What is certain is this: Malcolm X was only 39 years old when his life ended. His transformation from militant separatist to global human rights advocate was just beginning. And with his death, America lost not only a leader, but also the chance to see how far his evolving vision might have gone. Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk was more than a political activist. He was a symbol. Born in 1993 in Illinois, he co-founded Turning Point USA in 2012 when he was only 18 years old. His mission was simple: bring conservative values to college campuses. Over the next decade, that small student organization became a national powerhouse, with millions of followers, conferences across the country, and an undeniable influence on America's political future. Kirk was unapologetically bold. He spoke against what he called the radical left, criticized the mainstream media, and championed conservative values with passion. To his supporters, he represented courage. To his critics, he represented division. But whichever side you stood on, one truth was certain: Kirk had power, and his voice carried far beyond college auditoriums. On September 10, 2025, Kirk was in Utah, preparing to speak at Utah Valley University. The event was part of Turning Point's American Comeback Tour, a series designed to energize conservatives ahead of the 2026 midterm elections. Nearly 3,000 people gathered in the event center, a mix of students, families, and supporters eager to hear him. The atmosphere was electric. Witnesses recall upbeat music, excited chatter, and chants of support. Security was present at entrances, checking bags and monitoring the crowd. Everything suggested this would be another fiery Kirk speech, nothing out of the ordinary. But at 12:23 p.m., ordinary ended. A single shot cut through the air. The sound echoed across the auditorium. At first, many didn't realize what had happened. Some thought it was fireworks, others assumed equipment had malfunctioned. But then they saw Charlie Kirk collapse at the podium. He had been struck in the neck by a bullet fired from outside the venue. Panic erupted. Students screamed and scrambled for the exits. Some dove under chairs. Families clutched children as the crowd surged. Witnesses described the scene as chaos: chairs overturned, people falling to the ground, others crying and shouting for help. Emergency responders rushed in within minutes. Kirk was carried out on a stretcher, bleeding heavily. He was transported to a local hospital, but the injury was catastrophic. Despite efforts by medical staff, Charlie Kirk was pronounced dead. The investigation moved quickly. Police identified that the shot had been fired from an elevated rooftop on campus, a location chosen for precision and cover. Roughly 24 hours later, search teams recovered the weapon, a Mauser 98 bolt-action rifle, wrapped in a towel and hidden in a wooded area near the university. The suspect was identified as 22-year-old Tyler Robinson. A manhunt stretched across Utah for 33 tense hours before Robinson was arrested without incident. Prosecutors later charged him with aggravated murder, felony discharge of a firearm, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, and violence in the presence of a child. They also confirmed their intention to pursue the death penalty. The news spread across America instantly. Social media erupted within minutes. Supporters of Kirk flooded online spaces with grief and outrage, describing him as a martyr for free speech and conservative values. President Donald Trump issued a statement, calling Kirk a fearless defender of America's future. But the reaction wasn't only about mourning. Some critics reflected on his polarizing role in society. Commentators across the political spectrum debated whether America's toxic political climate had paved the way for such an attack. Others questioned how a high-profile figure, with a history of drawing both strong support and fierce opposition, could be killed so easily despite security measures. And, as always, theories followed. Was this the act of a lone gunman, or part of something larger? Could the shooting have been prevented with tighter security? Were there warning signs missed in the days leading up to the event? For investigators, the case was straightforward. One man, one rifle, one shot. But for the public, it wasn't that simple. The killing of Charlie Kirk echoed too closely the assassinations of figures like Martin Luther King Jr., John F. Kennedy, and Malcolm X. Men whose influence made them both admired and despised. Men whose lives ended violently at the height of their power. And so, another name was added to the list of leaders silenced by a gun. Another event that forced Americans to confront an uncomfortable truth. History has a way of repeating itself. Charlie Kirk's death wasn't just about politics. It was about a society where powerful voices, whether they inspire hope or controversy, face risks that too often end in tragedy. And the question lingers, are we learning from these losses, or simply watching the same story play out again and again? Closing reflection. Imagine the voices we've just revisited. Martin Luther King Jr. calling for justice. John F. Kennedy, promising a new America. Malcolm X, demanding equality and truth. And Charlie Kirk, speaking to a generation of conservatives about the future. Different ideologies. Different times. But all shared one thing. Their voices were powerful enough to move millions. And in the end, that power made them targets. So we ask the haunting question, do people deserve to die because of their beliefs? Because of their words? Because they saw the world differently than those around them? If the answer is yes, then we are erasing the very beauty of humanity, the freedom to think, to believe, to speak. But if the answer is no, then we must confront another truth. History will repeat itself if lessons are not learned. Security lapses, political division, unchecked hate, they all create cracks where violence slips through. And every time, it costs a life. This isn't just about the past. It's about the future. Whose voice will be silenced next if society doesn't change? That's why on this channel, we don't just tell stories, we raise awareness. Because behind every assassination, every conspiracy, every unanswered question, there is a warning. A warning that if we don't learn, if we don't protect those who dare to speak, we will watch the same story play out again and again. So now we turn to you. What do you believe is missing? Are investigators overlooking something? Are authorities blind to security flaws? Or is this cycle something deeper, something we haven't yet faced as a society? Drop your thoughts, your theories, your warnings in the comments below. Because silence doesn't just erase voices of the past, it allows new tragedies to unfold in the future.